Welcome everybody to the first video in the Introductory to Computer Science series. So we're going to be talking about what a computer is. So a computer is just a machine denoted by the box. And it's a machine, in our case, made up of a bunch of wires in a certain way so that when it takes in input, it can produce a different output that we can use in the world. Alright, so let's talk about the different types of computers there are. So there are four types that I want to talk about. First, there's the embedded. I'm trying to write fast because I talk faster than I write, but bear with me. So we have one example, I'll just throw it out there. So a microwave is an example of an embedded device because when you punch in numbers and hit go, there has to be a computer to basically turn on the microwave radiation and turn it off, so that your food's not being heated up forever. So an embedded device is really something that has computers inside of it that's causing a physical thing to happen. In the microwave example, the computer is causing the radiation to happen. It might be a robot. The computer could be controlling how it's moving, the arms or legs. Whatever it is, if a physical thing's happening due to a computer being inside of it, it's probably an embedded system. Alright, so the second type of computer that I want to talk about is the personal computer. The PC stands for personal computer, and there are three personal computers that I want to talk about. First being the desktop. So the desktop is just the box that sits under your desk that's connected to a monitor, and this is what people usually think of as a computer, but really a computer has a much broader spectrum than just the desktop. And then the second version is kind of like a child to the desktop. It's the laptop. It's basically a desktop that sits on your lap and can move. And then the third is more of a category. So it's the mobile. This includes phones and anything that's mobile, really. Those are the three examples of the personal computer. It's a computer that you use to do things that you want to do as an individual. All right, and then the third type of computer that I want to talk about is the supercomputer. A supercomputer can sometimes be known as a mainframe as well. And all this is a regular computer that's scaled to a much larger size. So a normal computer might be able to do so many calculations, but a supercomputer could do a lot more calculations than a normal computer. For example, in China, there is a supercomputer called the Tianhe. I don't know if that's how you say it or not. I try my best. But anyway, the Tianhe, it's version 2, I guess, can do 33.886 petaflops of calculations per second. So to put this into perspective, a petaflop is 1 quadrillion. And one neat thing, I just want to mention this real quick. I never really realized this, but when you hear the names of numbers, so quadrillion, you can think of quad, which means 4, and then add 1 to 4, which is 5. And that's how many sets of zeros there are. So 1 quadrillion is 1 with 5 sets of 3 zeros. Just like this. That's a lot of zeros. So that's 1 quadrillion, and then this computer in particular can do about 34 quadrillion floating point calculations per second. And that's what a flop is. Flop just stands for floating point operations per second. Alright, so that's what a supercomputer is. And then the last type of computer that I want to talk about is the server. So all you really need to know about a server at this point is that it serves to store data and connect computers. So servers are used in computer networking. And for example, other than computer networking, a business can own their own servers that store all their data. So that's just an example of what a server does. And we'll get more into servers as we get into computer networking. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about the parts of a computer. So parts. There are 3 main parts that you can find in every computer, and then there's one extra part that I think is important to mention. So the first of which is the input-output, which is the I/O. That's what that stands for. One example of input is just the keyboard for a desktop or laptop, and then the output could be something like the monitor. All right, so this is how you get the data, and this is how you show the results. And then the second type of, or the second part rather, of every computer is the processing power. So processing power is the computer's ability to manipulate that data that's from the input rather. So how we do this is with something called a CPU. And a CPU stands for centralized processing unit. And CPUs come in 64-bit and 32-bit versions, which is important for the next part we're going to talk about. But CPU basically provides the functionality to a computer. It does the math on the input. All right, and then the third section of a computer is what's known as memory or storage. I'm just going to write memory. They're pretty much interchangeable. But memory stores as a holding place for all the data that can't fit inside the CPU. So I mentioned that a CPU is typically 64 32 bits. This is very, very small. So we need to have memory to store all the data that can't fit inside the CPU. So this is just a holding place. So I'll just mark it with that, whatever that is. So it's a holding place. All right, and then the fourth optional part of a computer is what's known as a GUI, and GUI stands for Graphical User Interface, and this is just the visualization of data. Okay, so for example, you're working with a desktop, so it's connected to a monitor, and you're playing a game, so you're seeing light coming off the screen so many times a second. That would be an example of a GUI, Graphical User Interface. You're seeing the data visualized through the game. Okay, and not every computer can have a GUI. Some do, some don't, but it's good to know what a GUI is.